Welcome to the Download, where we bring you discussion and analysis from a Catholic perspective. Today is Tuesday, June 13th, 2023. I'm Brad Eli, here with my two co-hosts, Simon Rafe, Christine Niles. Joining us today in the fourth chair is Kyle Copey. Hi, Kyle.
Hi, Brad.
The bishops. If you follow Church Militant, you've heard us talk many times about the problems with today's crop of bishops. But today, we'll be talking about a bishop who appears to have done a good thing and is still getting dunked on about it. To start things off, we'll be talking with one of our reporters, Dr. William Mahoney. Hey, William, I believe Bishop Earl Fernandez in Columbus, Ohio, is getting blasted in the media for apparently being conservative.
That's exactly correct. There was an opinion piece written for the Columbus local paper there by a Jack Aurora. He's a lawyer there. He starts the article by bashing the bishop for the way he treated the Paulist fathers at Newman Center. The bishop had basically sidelined two of them and left the other two there to practicing ministry there. So he goes on and talks about how the bishop's a liar, but then he launches into a bigger tirade about the reason that the pews are emptying is because the bishops aren't with the times, basically. And then he goes on, and in only about 800 words, he manages to hit every single liberal thing. He mentions Trump, he mentions a lack of support for the LGBTQ plus, I always forget that, sorry, for them, and for not ordaining women, and for not being too harsh against abortion and contraception, and he just every single talking point he manages to hit.
Yeah, he's also talking about Fernandez saying, you can do preaching if you want there and saying Mass. You just can't be, doing funerals or maybe weddings there without permission from the bishop. But the Newman Center is not a parish, right? So they wouldn't have just automatic permission anyway from Fernandez to just go ahead and do things like that, wouldn't they?
No, that's exactly correct. And the bishop is within his full authority to handle these priests how he wishes. I found other articles of Aurora. He contributes quite a bit to this newspaper and as an op-ed writer, and he also has his own blog. So I sift through a lot of his stuff to try to get deeper into his thinking, and he has just a fundamentally bad understanding of the church. So I mean, he's either ignorant of Catholic teaching or he's rebelling against it. And one thing is how he sees a bishop, because he actually says, why does the bishop think he's a parent? In one of his pieces, because he is. That's why. I mean, he's a spiritual father. In fact, he has the fullness of the priesthood, and all the priests in his diocese are extensions of him. So he's absolutely a parent in that sense. He's a shepherd, he's a parent, and all those things. So he sees the church as an organization, like almost like a company that's just a nonprofit company making money or something, and to do whatever mission. He doesn't see it as a supernatural, and that's his fundamental problem.
Absolutely. I think Simon's got a question for you.
Yeah, B. So obviously this is, the local Columbus paper, and it probably has a number of op-eds in there. Have there been any sort of op-eds against this lawyer's positions, or is it just kind of him just sort of saying whatever he likes and people who agree with him?
I haven't seen anything against it. He's just saying whatever he likes. I don't know if people agree. There's not a comment section, so I don't know how he's being received. But I know the newspaper, the editorial team at the newspaper seems to publish his stuff from what I can see.
Yeah, well, it may be. I mean, obviously, let's give the Columbus Dispatch or whatever it is the benefit of the doubt that it could be the case that there just is nobody responding. I think this is kind of a call to action for any of our viewers there who are in that area, in the Columbus area, within the Columbus diocese. The ability to actually write an op-ed, send it in to this newspaper, or indeed a bunch of newspapers. I think there's probably a number of local newspapers there. An opportunity to actually come out and say, hey, this lawyer, he may know the law, but he doesn't know the church, and here's an alternate opinion. I mean, obviously that would be, a spiritual work of mercy there to kind of instruct the ignorant and to evangelize the people.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. They should. I hope people do respond to that.
Yeah. So this bishop in Columbus, he's obviously done this thing. What else do we know about him? I mean, is he kind of well known for doing things, or is he just been marking time there in Columbus?
Yeah, he's relatively new there, but I think he has a background in psychology, so he has a good sense of human psychology as well. I believe he wrote a book at one point of how gays should not be admitted to the seminary, which of course is was Benedict XVI's position, and it's the church has that position. So he did write that book, and he's in a good place to talk about that, not just from a faith standpoint, but also from a psychological standpoint. So I know that about him. I know about the Paulist Fathers, and he seems to be Orthodox, and he seems that he's just doing his job as a bishop.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Sounds good.
And William, you mentioned in Derora's op-ed piece that he's critical of bishops like Fernandez, who he says are pushing people away from the church, and Derora gives what he thinks is the solution, which you went through, the litany of things, the dissident ideas that people on the left think need to be included in the church to get more people in it. But as we've seen, just when we look at, I guess, Protestant denominations, when you include that stuff, it actually pushes more people away, and your church, I think, degrades even faster. So, could you maybe comment a little bit more on that, and maybe even get to this one piece that I found? I think it was Derora's op-ed piece. It may have been another criticism of Fernandez by a local writer, but I believe it was in that op-ed piece where Derora alluded to something like, bishops have no life experience. They're all like a bunch of 65-year-old white guys who went straight from Catholic school into a minor seminary, and then they got a theology degree, and then they went into a parish, and so they don't know what it's like to be, an unwed pregnant mother. They don't know what it's like to rent an apartment or buy groceries. What do you make of that?
Not much. He says that, and I've seen pictures of him, and I would say he's probably a 65-year-old white guy, so I don't know why his opinion should count, but a bishop with the authority of the church, their ideas should not count. And they're not expressing opinions, by the way, they're expressing church teaching, so I don't make much of it. And it's just, he just sees the church all wrong. He clearly doesn't see it as a supernatural entity. He sees it as a kind of like a corporation or a business or something like that. And we just got to get people in. And as you pointed out, whenever that's done, more people leave. So a large part of why people abandon the church, I mean, obviously clergy sex abuse, and another is because of liberal priests and things like that. That's a big reason why people do walk away. So his solution is more of the same, because the solution to liberalism is more liberalism. That's always what they think. But he has it all backwards.
Well, thanks for chatting with us, Dr. Mahoney. It's been a pleasure. Thanks for getting us up to speed on that story. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.
So, Kyle, I was chatting with you about this story a little bit earlier, and you have your own take on why Fernandez was acting. Do you want to share that with the panel and with, a couple thousand viewers out there who might want to know what's in the mind of Kyle?
Sure. So this story backtracks about a year ago when I think it was this whole revolves around the situation at, was it the Ohio State University's Newman Center, which is obviously, under Bishop Fernandez's purview. The Paulist Fathers have had permission there for, the past 4 decades, it seems like, to go and I guess minister to people there. Now, a Newman Center, it's on a university's campus. You would think that it's ministering to whom? To college students, right? But from what I could tell, very few of them show up at this Newman Center. Who shows up? Well, it's a bunch of middle-aged homosexuals, based on the local news reports, the people that they were interviewing, the people who were very upset that Bishop Fernandez was kicking, so-called, the Paulist Fathers out, which he didn't kick them out at all. He gave them certain stipulations, as he should as a bishop. He says, look, we're not going to be doing whatever you guys were doing before, and I can't speculate on what was going on there, but just looking at the clientele, I can only guess. So the Bishop Fernandez comes down and says, look, we want to focus more on the students, we want to focus more on evangelization, which is good. That's what a Newman Center should all be about. He wanted to include groups, good Catholic groups that work with people who are same-sex attracted, like Courage. He wanted to include them in working with the community, and the people there who are committed to living the homosexual lifestyle. None of those people wanted to change and adhere to what the church teaches. None of those people, it seemed like, from my perspective, wanted to do that. So they felt, abandoned by Bishop Fernandez. That you're kicking me out. You're sucking my soul out. I think that's one of the interviewees said. So yeah, that's kind of what started this whole thing. It's just a good bishop. A bishop being a bishop, I would say.
Okay, but if Fernandez is doing the right thing, did he make that the reason why he was acting known?
So that's where the interesting part comes in, and that's where the corporate, the bureaucratic kind of explaining comes in. Because if you look at interviews with Fernandez, that's why I hesitate to call him a good bishop. Yes, he's sort of doing the right thing here, kind of cleaning up the act. But when push comes to shove, when local media asks him, why are you doing this? Is it anti-LGBT? He backtracks. He says, no, it has nothing to do with that. I'm sure it has nothing to do with that. Really, that's the main problem here. Everyone can see it. You're making changes, and you're saying that's not the problem here? No, that's definitely the problem. He uses, ambiguous language like, I just, want to focus on evangelization. That's all I'm trying to do here. No, how about you be a stalwart bishop and come out and say, look, there's homo crap going on here. I'm trying to clean it up. And just mic drop and leave it at that.
Yeah, homo crap, that passes copy edit. That's actually a word in the English.
Yeah, I think it's in catechism paragraph something.
Okay, yeah, so apologies to our audience out there. We tried to find a fourth person who was actually intelligent on the panel, and we could only come up with Kyle. So, apologies.
Well, usually Nick sits here, so I feel like
somebody that's got a little more,
I have to talk
on.
like a Zoomer. So.
Right, okay. So Simon, good bishop,
Bradley.
Bad bishop, Fernandez.
There are no good bishops.
There are no good bishops.
No, look, I've said this before multiple times. There are no good bishops, and every single time I say it, somebody gets bent out of shape, and I'm sure someone's going to get bent out of shape in the comment section. I say it in the comment section, and people get bent out of shape, and I get a comment being like, "My bishop's a good bishop because he led a rosary procession," or my bishop's a good bishop. He says the Latin Mass. He preaches about Jesus, and it's like, okay, that does not mean you are a good bishop. Good is an objective standard. I mean, first, if you want me to be like really kind of technical, and a bit. A little over precise on this. Christ says, why do you call me good? Only God is good. So, okay, a bishop is not good because he is not God. And I think, again, when we're talking about the Father Jackson issue, this whole thing of elevating clerics and bishops, to this idol position, that we turn them into these idols because they do one or two decent things. They do one or two things that
or they're not doing anything really bad.
Or they're not doing anything really bad, so we come along, and people are so thirsty for leadership that they will crawl through the desert towards a mirage, and when they get there, they will drink the sand. I mean, that is just a thing. So, but then you look at this thing and you say, okay, well, is a bishop good? Well, a person is good when they are behaving in the manner that Jesus would have them behave, when Jesus himself would behave. At this point, it's like, yeah, is this anti-LGBT? The answer, even if it wasn't anti-LGBT, even if this was a question of just saying, look, I want to focus on evangelization, the response should be, well, to be honest, look, all I wanted to do was focus on evangelization, but there is a positive thing happening here, and I'm getting rid of, and I quote, the homo crap. And you see, that there would be the action of a good bishop. The action of a good bishop is one who does more than just his job. There is a wonderful line of the gospel. I constantly come back to it on this one. We are unprofitable servants. We have only done what was required. That's the whole point. You are supposed to add value to your employer. That's why you're employed. An unprofitable servant is one who just does his job. An unprofitable bishop, it's like you're just doing your job. You didn't take that extra step, which is what's required of you. That is how the church is built up, with people doing good. No, I stand by my decision. There are no good bishops. People are going to be upset with me in the comments. They will put the name of their bishop, and I will remind them their bishop shut down the sacraments during COVID.
They'd be upset with you for some other reason anyway. So,
but just to provide also a balance to that, when we have bishops who are doing good things, like shutting down this obviously very bad ministry, we need Catholics, first of all, to be praying for their bishops. We need to pray more for our bishops. We don't pray enough for our bishops. Include them in your daily rosary. But then also show public support. So for instance, he's getting backlash from this op-ed, right? This person writing in. Well, then you write letters in praising him for this act. Trust me, Bishops need that support. They do, because they have their jobs are very lonely. They're facing a lot of opposition from outside, from the world, but also from inside as well. They've got people sabotaging them from inside their own chanceries, and it's a very lonely job. And so they need that support. Believe me, it means the world to them. They're human just like anybody else. I'm very human, and it does mean a lot to me when I get letters of support from people, because I face all sorts of vicious backlash all the time. When I get those letters of support, they do mean a lot to me. I'm sure they mean a lot to bishops too. So those are two ways that we can help support these bishops to become, we hope, good bishops.
So if you watch this show out there, write to Fernandez, tell him Church Militant says some good things about him and that he should support Church Militant.
Give us an interview.
Give us an interview. We'll get that. Kyle, bring up one thing before we get off Fernandez here. He is a product of a family who prayed the rosary. You want to bring us up to speed on that?
Sure. I mean, yeah. I mean, looking into his background, I mean, he has all the right pedigree that would make someone a good bishop. He came from immigrant parents, lived in, a very sort of a destitute situation, struggling to raise 5 boys on a, low-income family, living in a low-income neighborhood. They didn't have any family here. I believe they were from India. And yeah, but he recounts, looking back on his childhood, he'll tell everyone that the faith, the church was pretty much the most important thing. Faith and family were really all that it meant to his parents. And yeah, they, as you mentioned, praying the daily rosary, that's one of the things they'll tell you about his childhood. They had 5 boys. He was one of 5, all kneeling on the hardwood floor. And a little funny story with that, Fernandez says that as young boys, they felt the pain in their knees on that hardwood floor during that rosary, right? So as any child will do, you want to make it as quick as possible. So they said the rosary, those Hail Marys, pretty fast. Dad caught on to it, and he raised his sandal a couple times to say, hey, slow down, boys. So he a little funny tidbit there.
Spare the sandal, spoil the child.
Exactly,
I like that. Yeah. One last thing to clear out there, when we heard some of the op-eds saying, well, if he was never a murderer, and he was never, he doesn't know what to be like an unwed mother. Well, Mother Teresa, I guarantee you could understand how the problem of abortion was, because she understood the goodness of life. Even though she never had an abortion, she could understand the tragedy that brought. She said it kills too. It kills the soul of the mother and the life of the baby. She understood this because she understood the flip side of what you're losing. And that's something I think that people are immersed in evil, and maybe an axe murderer or somebody never really understood the greatness, the goodness of a human life and the value of that human life when he snuffed it out. And he just kind of calloused that way. So you get somebody else that's not immersed in those things, they might surprise you in how well they understand that whole picture far better than you think.
I think there's also kind of an interesting thing. I mean, firstly, you can kind of say, as B said, that this lawyer fellow is also a 65-year-old white guy, as he said. So it's like, well, what does he know? It's like, okay. This lawyer has never been a single mother. He went from probably quite a privileged, good school to university and then to law school and then became, a junior partner or what have you, up through law firms, and maybe he has his own practice and those sort of things. He's not necessarily known any kind of difficulties and penury that he's talking about. He's not part of a marginalized community in that sense. But that sort of just goes, well, that's a Tukokwe thing, isn't it? It's you too. But the issue is, I think, and this was actually summed up by, back in the UK, they've stopped doing it so much now, but it used to be every kind of election, they would go around and ask politicians, how much is a pint of milk? And it was this whole thing that you would go around and ask a politician, how much is a pint of milk? And the politicians, of course, never knew how much a pint of milk was because they hadn't bought a pint of milk in years. And occasionally one or two of the more left-wing people would know because they would kind of know. And this was used as a shorthand for you're not in touch with the people. You don't know how much a pint of milk is. Anyway. A political comedian said in one of his bits that he was doing, he said, I don't need my politician to know how much a pint of milk costs. I need my politician to know how much a war in the Middle East costs. And that's very, very true. I don't need a bishop to know, to kind of your point, I don't need a bishop to know what it's like to have to go and buy groceries on, Snap cards or something like this. I don't need to have a bishop to know what it's like to try to raise, 2 boys from different fathers when you're a single mother. I don't need a bishop to know that experientially. What I need the bishop to know is I need the bishop to know, okay, how can I bring Christ to these people? That's his job. His job is not to be as some sort of social worker, to come along and say, well, here, let's lift you out of poverty just by doing that. It's like, let me bring you the dignity of being a child of Christ. That's what it should be. Let me bring you the dignity of being a child of Christ. Let me bring you to a point where you have that sense of charity. So if you are, for example, you are a lawyer who gets op-eds published, and obviously you probably have tassels on your shoes and a fair bit of money, you may be moved to charity towards the single mother, towards the person surviving on Snap cards or something like that. That is what the bishop is for. And again, I don't know if Fernandez is doing this. I'm not about to canonize the guy, but certainly I think it's unfair to throw that against him.
One of the things also they'll talk about in that article, Aurora talks about, well, you are closing 15 parishes. Well, okay, but on the chopping block was 19. They dialed it back to 15. And guess what? He inherited a very bad situation that's been going on for decades from all these bishops who were ordaining homosexual men, who were turning away good men, who didn't preach the gospel message for decades. Cardinal Burke says the greatest problem was the catechesis problem. And he was quoting Father John Hardin, that said we're in this huge crisis because nobody knows their faith because it wasn't taught from the pulpit or the DRE in the catechism. So we're in a terrible problem. No one's going to church. No one's going to mass, especially after the COVID. They shut him down. So he inherited a very bad situation. And now they got a lot of parishes, a lot of money going on that aren't necessarily going to be financially stable. So you got to look at those things from those standpoints, but certainly don't say, oh, because you're too hard on people committing having sex outside of marriage with regard to LGBTQ and with regard to abortion. You're too tough on the abortion. That's murder.
When it comes to those parish closing issues, we got to realize that a lot of these newer bishops, of which Fernandez is one, didn't necessarily cause this problem. They inherited the problem from decades and decades of mismanagement, poor catechesis, poor evangelization. We know the rest. So they're sort of, managing the decline, you could say. Some of them are responsible in some ways because they're old enough to be responsible. Some of them are perpetuating the poor catechesis, I would say. And, the fact that they are closing some of these parishes is probably a good thing. I know we always want to lament the fact that a parish is closing, but honestly, if you have an empty building and you need to downsize, go ahead and do it. But the bizarre thing is that they're spinning these parish closings and consolidations in a good way. Mm-hmm. They're having all these slogans for, unleash the gospel or families of parishes.
Let me read a few of those and I'll let you continue right here. Here's a few of those slogans that he's talking about. In Cincinnati, the Archdiocese, beacons of light. Archdiocese of Detroit, families of parishes. That's their slogan. Pittsburgh, on mission for the church alive. St. Louis, all things new. They should be calling it all things dying. And Chicago, Supich, renew my church by closing 160 parishes, And that's really a symptom of the problem, right? That this is the decaying. So anyway, go ahead.
If you were a bishop, if I were a bishop, I would use this as sort of an evangelical plea for people to return to the sacraments. And that's what none of these bishops are doing. They say, oh no, this is a good thing. We get to share resources with these parishes. No, you're losing people. You're bleeding Catholics. For every one Catholic that converts, it's almost like 7 that leave the church or something like that. Acknowledge the problem, tell people about it, and make some prayers of reparation or something.
Yeah, I think you're right, though, that Bishop Fernandez, he's not responsible for this problem. He's inherited this mess. He's trying to do what he can to stem this hemorrhaging of the faith. And what's nice is that it seems like the newer, younger crop of bishops are better on the whole, because it seems to be mostly it's the boomer, the boomer Catholics and the boomer bishops who seem to be the most liberal. I mean, what, the 65-year-old, lawyer writing in? I mean, yeah, so they seem to be hopefully a dying breed. Hopefully there's a newer, fresher class of younger, more Orthodox bishops coming in. And also, if you look at the sex abuse as well in the church, you also see that it is on the decline. In fact, it hit its high point in 1969. That was like the worst. That was the highest point of sex abuse in the U.S. church. And then it just sort of gradually starts going down until now in the 2000s. It's really way down here. So that's a good thing. But that's no guarantee, of course, because we published just a few years ago testimony from, at the time he was anonymous, but now he's come out and been made public, John Monaco, who warned that just because a seminary today has the reputation of orthodoxy doesn't necessarily mean that it's all great. So he listed 2 examples of experiences he had. He went to St. Charles Borromeo Seminary, which has a very strong reputation for orthodoxy. This is in Pennsylvania. He was shocked by what he found. He said his first hint of something being wrong was late at night, one seminarian who's older than him knocked on his door, came in, wanted to talk, and then they were just chatting, and then abruptly this older seminarian started to talk about masturbation and saying, "Oh, do you ever masturbate? Do you have thoughts? What are your thoughts?" And John felt extremely uncomfortable, and he said, "Okay, didn't really want to," and he just politely asked him, "It's time for me to go to bed." Instead of going to bed, this man sits back, slouches in his seat, and shows him his erection. And at that time, John's like, "Get out of my room." He reports this guy. And fortunately, the seminary kicked him out. Fortunately, they did the right thing. But the problem is that there were other things he witnessed as well. There was a drunken party with seminarians where seminarians were literally cuddling with each other, playing games, getting drunk. He was given some drink. He was only 18 at the time, but they were pressuring him, drink, drink, drink. He drank something. He said there must have been some sort of drug in it, because he said his tongue started burning and he felt very strange, disoriented, and he fell asleep. When he woke up, he saw a bunch of seminaries sleeping in each other's arms. He reported this. Nothing was done. And so he eventually left. That's St. Charles Borromeo Seminary, one of the strongest, most Orthodox. He goes to St. John's in Brighton, Massachusetts, another one with a strong reputation for orthodoxy. Same problems there. It was even worse there. A lot of drunkenness, homosexuality, and he just finally decided, I can't stay here anymore. So
do that. And so there's a man who would, potentially have made, an Orthodox priest, a man who clearly is not into, sitting there, discussing masturbation late at night, which is like, that is not a thing guys do. I mean, I don't know if that's a thing women do. I suspect it's not, but it's just not a thing guys do. Guys, regular dudes do not do that. It's not a thing. But, he would have made this Orthodox priest and done that, but now he's had these couple of experiences, and now, of course, he's out of the priesthood. This is similar to the case as was discussed in Michael Rose's book, Goodbye, Good Men, where Orthodox men were sort of, not necessarily drummed out of the seminary, but there was an environment there that pushed them out, that made them feel uncomfortable. They didn't get the backup that they needed in terms of reporting these things. And so what you're left with is it's essentially a series of filters that comes through. I was actually discussing this with the pastor of my parish just this Sunday gone. And there's a series of filters that are put into place. So the bishops and the vocation directors, they come along and they go, okay, here's my pool of people who want to go to seminary. Here's the pool of guys who want to go to seminary. Okay, so I pick the ones who are weak and malleable. And as they go through, philosophy and theology, and then they move through, okay, the only ones that we ordain to the transitional diaconate, they're the ones who are particularly weak and malleable. The only ones that we ordain to the priesthood, they're the ones who are weak and malleable. The only ones that we give pastorships to are the weak and malleable. The only ones that we move to the chancery are the weak and malleable. The only ones who get made bishops are the weak and malleable. So what you end up with, this is kind of the thing when you come along and you say there are no good bishops. It's because they're all weak men, fundamentally. Even if they have some sense of orthodoxy, they have some sense of rightness within them, they're soft people, and they've been pushed into these things to be soft people. That's why, as you said, Fernandez comes, oh, this isn't about LGBT. Really, you couldn't even just kind of go, well, actually, it probably is. This is about, checks notes, Homo crap.
Hypersensitivity to not offending anybody. And if you look back all the times when Jesus offended somebody, my goodness, knocking over the tables in the temple and whipping people out, that's kind of offensive. That might even get you a misdemeanor in jail time today. So this idea that they can't offend anybody is just way out of bounds. But the younger bishops there started to distinguish themselves during the McCarrick era. Bishop Lopes from the Anglican Ordinariate, Catholic group. You hear Anglican, but it's a group that was set aside. They were Catholic. They could still do the Anglican rite, Catholicized. And he was one of the few that came out, and it was went viral, his statement. It was a Sunday homily. And he said, all these bishops coming out clutching their pectoral crosses that says, "Oh, I didn't know anything about McCarrick." And he said, as a younger bishop, you get an interesting perspective. We would all know that when McCarrick would come to the seminary, and he said, and we all knew, what was going on, what was happening. And he emphasized that very much. Now, he's a young bishop. And he called himself out as a young bishop and said their perspective is interesting, that they have a perspective that's not this locked in, 1960 or 65-year-old bureaucratic viewpoint. Some of these guys are coming in and just, looking at things fresh for the first time and got a little bit of that gullibility, even though they don't even realize how much of their backbone's been extracted in the whole process. That first of all, you guys were chosen because you don't have a very strong spine. And, then you were taught not to stiffen it very much in all of these instances. And I'm telling you, that type of formation or deformation in the seminary is very brutal. For years, they're taught, don't offend anybody, even if you have to hide the truth to do it. Yeah. Never, ever offend anybody. And I'm not sure if the building is burning and someone's like, kind of all sleepy, and you're like, you got to get out of the building because it's burning. You're like, well, I don't know about that. Get out now. Oh, no, you're offending me now. Well, my goodness, you're going to be burning up in this building soon.
My understanding is that Bishop Lopes went to the Pontifical North American College in Rome, and McCarrick had a very close relationship with the NAC, very close. He was always there, always visiting, staying nights, and that's where all the seminarians knew. They all knew. We've reported quite a bit on the NAC. The NAC is a massive problem. The NAC has produced some of the worst clerical homosexual predators. It continues to produce them, unfortunately. I did a special report last year titled Devil in Rome about Father Jacob Bertrand, who he wasn't at the NAC technically. He was at I believe he was at the Angelicum, but he had a very close relationship with NAC priests who were all his friends. And this is a man who was later outed as a satanic priest who committed ritual abuse. It's not something I make it up or sensationalizing, because we have it all documented. We have the victim, we have the police statements, you have multiple eyewitnesses, all of that, and we have his own confession. Okay, so yeah, the NAC is a massive problem. When you're talking about the homo crap in the church, the NAC is a huge problem.
Yeah, and I think I would say, that obviously people should, if they haven't seen Christine's special report, they should go see it, that specific one, because obviously the ones that are there. I just want to take like a couple of seconds, just say everybody needs to go and spend some time and watch Christine's special reports. Christine does these great special reports. Some of them obviously get a lot of traction, a lot of interest, because they are about, quite sensational things. For obviously, one's about, the sex abuse in the SSPX. That got a lot of interest because it was shared around, by people who were disagreeing with you, and there's a lot of argument and stuff, but they're always very, very well done. They're really the jewels of what we do here. And I know you put a huge amount of work and effort into those, Christine. I would just urge everyone, seriously, just clear your day, stop watching, whatever garbage is on, your Amazon streaming or your Netflix streaming or whatever, or you say, well, I'm going to watch The Chosen because it's about you. No, don't be doing that. Don't be doing that. Read the Gospels, which will take you like a third of the time, and it's much better, and watch Christine's pieces because they're really good. On the subject, though, of McCarrick and the NAC, just a shill for us next week, beginning, what is that, the 18th next week? I don't know.
19th on Monday.
19th on Monday, there you are, thank you. The beginning of the week is the Sunday, but next week is McCarrick week here, and we're going to be doing a ton of coverage. I don't even know how much it is, but obviously I'll be on the download, I think, most days there, and we'll be doing various special reports and things, because this is, it's the anniversary of this whole thing being revealed. And again, so obviously we're going to be returning to that information. Again, clear your schedule, or your schedule, depending on how you pronounce it, and come here and make sure that you're watching that, because this is a key thing to be aware of and to be knowing about, and you've got to be able to engage with it about this sort of stuff so that you can discuss it.
Yeah, and people might be asking us, well, why are you still focusing on McCarrick? Didn't that break in 2018? Why is that still relevant? Isn't the man dying on his last legs and he's being charged in 2 separate criminal courts? The reason we're focusing on it is because there are wider implications in the church. There is a complicit network of clergy who protected him for decades, and they are still very much in power. And they're still there, and they're pretending like they didn't have anything to do with this. They're distancing themselves and washing their hands clean. Yeah. They're still in power. This is related. You mentioned the SSPX. People have asked me, Christine, why do you focus on the SSPX so much? Well, one of the reasons is because precisely that. Okay, I've exposed some predator clergy who've been convicted, they've been charged, all of that. But there is still a complicit network of people in the SSPX going up to the highest levels that protected them, promoted them, and have never apologized, never admitted to any of it, and are still very much in power. You have to continue to focus on all of this to expose it.
Yeah.
Our particular coverage of McCarrick is rooted in the fact that the 5-year anniversary of McCarrick first being known as a predator on June 20th, the New York Times comes out and say he's being named in a lawsuit. So he's being named as a abuser of a young man who we later knew was James Grine. That's what started the whole summer of shame right there, and that's on Tuesday, the 20th, and that's what's going to be the center part of that. But that whole week is going to be talking about, yes, this whole apparatus is still in place. All the problems that we all naively hoped in 2018, oh, we got the homo crap on the run, we're going to be flushing this down the toilet, the church is getting cleaner, all this is finally coming out, great news, great things are happening. We were all like, hurrah. And then we're kind of like, oh, this isn't really getting cleaned up, February of 2019, the sham synod, that sex summit, I should say, that Supich was sitting here going like this on the whole time, see my hands shaking, like that was Supich, watch his hands shaking. And we thought, oh, this just all fizzled. And then we're thinking, well, Trump's going to do the right thing with RICO, the racketeering investigation across straight lines. That's going to clean up the church. And then he kind of went by the wayside, and now we have Biden, And so that was just this détente between, the politicians who were saying, well, we can blow you guys up anytime we want, and you could all go to jail. And the Catholic bishops are saying, well, if we said, Catholics shouldn't vote for you. So there's this détente going on here between the two sides. Nothing is getting done. And now we're like, man, nothing really came of all that. How much we knew in 2018. Go on our site and say, #CatholicMeToo. And you're going to see an endless list of reporting that went on and on and on about all the stuff that we knew there. And none of that stuff got fixed.
No.
Yeah, because the bishops expect the laity to fall asleep. I mean, they issued some hollow apologies. If you all remember, the Bishop of Richmond, Barry Nestout, had this big penitential service where it was very theatrical. He laid down on the floor, he took off his mitre, and it was just this penitential service. Oh, we're so sorry, God, please forgive us. He had this penitential service, and then, like I said, make this big public display of we're so sorry for what happened with McCarrick, and then after that was just business as usual.
Well, then Father White, right? He went after Father... It's White.
White, yep. Yeah, Mark White.
And Mark White. And just hard because White was just saying, hey, people in the church, I want you to understand this whole dynamic. Just exactly what we're talking about here. He was talking about that. And the bishop's like, oh, you can't talk about any of that.
We published his book.
I was going to say, we have Father White's book in the store, Ordained by a Predator, which is very good.
He was ordained by McCarrick.
He was ordained, by McCarrick. I think, the whole thing of Nestout's, apology there, and this is his apology to God. It's sorry, God, we've messed up. Okay, well that's wonderful and that's fine, and it is. I'm not going to say that he wasn't contrite. I'm not going to say that that's not a wonderful thing. Obviously, it is. I'm reminded it happened actually just this week. Somebody contacted me. I shan't say who, but somebody contacted me and they were very upset. This person was very upset because they had gone to confession and they had confessed accidentally getting something extra when they went shopping. The cashier hadn't rung it up. And they'd gone and confessed this. And the priest had said, okay, well, this is all very well and good, but are you going to go and pay for it? Are you going to go and pay for this extra item that you got from this store? And this person was absolutely aghast at that thought. And this person was contacting me to say, well, how dare the priest say that? And I'm like, I am not getting between you and your confessor, but speaking personally, he's got a point. That absolutely, yes, Lord, I'm sorry. Well, you're sorry for what? You're sorry that you didn't say, hey, you didn't ring this thing up or whatever, you're sorry about that. But you've got to make it right. And in this case, again, it's kind of like if you went to Nest Out and you said, okay, that's all well and good, mate, but can you make this right? Can you fix this problem? Can you be, let's return to my point, can you be a good bishop? People come like, oh, Simon says there's no good bishop. Simon's a whole thing. A bunch of acceptable racial slurs about scurvy. But there's a whole question of, are you a good bishop if you've allowed this to go on? If you had the ability to stop this, are you a good bishop? Are you a good priest if you didn't stand up and go, hey, you know what? I know about McCarrick. We found about McCarrick 5 years ago, and the guy was already, 1 foot in the grave.
As you mentioned, contrition is shown not just by saying I'm sorry, but also making reparation. That's necessary. You've got to make reparation. Nest Out is firmly in the camp of not a good bishop. We've reported on him extensively. He's the one who threw the Father Guarnizzo under the bus, doing Cardinal Wuerl's bidding back when he was in D.C. Father Guarnizzo denied communion to a lesbian Buddhist who came to him before in the sacristy before Mass and said, by the way, I'm a lesbian Buddhist. Set him up. And he said, okay, well, I'm going to have to deny you Holy Communion. I know this is your mother's funeral, and I'm very sorry about that, but I cannot give you Holy Communion because this is what the church teaches. She shows up anyway at the altar rail. He very politely, discreetly does not give. And then she goes running to the media. And everybody's all upset with the priest. And what does Nest Out do? He throws him under the bus. This is a very bad bishop. So the question is, great Bishop Nest Out, you had this massive penitential service that was very public display of sorrow. What have you done in reparation? Because you were part of this whole complicit network that protected McCarrick in D.C.
Even Christ says, he who says, Lord, Lord, shall not be saved, but he who does the will. Kyle, bishops didn't clean the church up. Politicians didn't clean the church up. Maybe God's going to clean the church up. Where's all this going? You have some take on it from Ratzinger by chance?
Sure. Yeah, this is pretty much a famous quote by Ratzinger at this point. This goes all the way back to the late 1960s in an interview he gave, I think it was a radio broadcast. And we can go ahead and read the whole quote. This is where it comes from. It's the whole idea of Ratzinger's smaller but stronger church. We talked about parish closings. I say that's probably not a bad thing. I'm sort of, I hate that Catholics are hemorrhaging out of the church, but I'm sort of excited to see the new crop come up who are going to be, it's going to be a smaller flock, but a stronger flock. And here's where that comes from. Benedict doesn't exactly use those words, but here's where people glean that from. So Benedict said in this radio broadcast, quote, "From the crisis of today, the church of tomorrow will emerge, a church that has lost much. She will become small and will have to start afresh, more or less from the beginning. She will no longer be able to inhabit many of the edifices she built in its prosperity. As the number of her adherents diminishes, so it will lose many of her social privileges." We've seen that. In contrast to an earlier age, it will be seen much more as a voluntary society entered only by freely decision. That just end quote. That brings up this whole idea of intentional discipleship, kind of a Catholic buzzword. But yeah, it's not going to be this Catholic by osmosis. It's not going to be, well, this is kind of how my parents raised me. It's like, no, either commit or get out the door.
If you'd have heard that in 1969, you'd have still said, no, you're crazy. Because all those beautiful churches were still having, full attendance. We didn't have all the shucka boxes built around Detroit, all these little tiny makeshift churches, and are closing. Unfortunately, the ones that are closing are these beautiful old churches, and that makes it even more heart-wrenching. But if you'd have heard that radio broadcast back then, you'd be like, well, what are you smoking? Because we're not even anywhere near close to that. But he knew, as you say, the sex abuse was peaking in the late 60s and early 70s. And catechism and everything was starting to go off the rails. And he was rubbing shoulders with a lot of these bishops who were going to be talking about that whole McCarrick era and possibly the communist angle and all that from 1922 on and the infiltration. So he was there, ground zero, and he must have been getting something.
Well, he was a theological advisor at the Second Vatican Council, of course, which is, he was one of the...
He wasn't necessarily one of the best at that council, by the way.
No.
A little on the liberal side.
He had the kind of conversion.
Yeah,
Thanks be to God.
He did, yeah, no, and look, I mean, what's the phrase? You know, if you're not a liberal at 20, you have no heart. If you're not a conservative at 40, you have no head. You know, and you know, whether or not that's right about the church, that's usually said, you know, politically, economically, socially, kind of thing. But yeah, he was there, and he was in a position to see it. He could see the theological changes that were coming, not necessarily because of the Second Vatican Council, but in the wake of the Second Vatican Council. He could see that thing that was being pushed through all of these, you know, theological experimentations and new ideas. He was well aware of them. He was, like I say, he was the specialized theological advisor. He could see all of the stuff that the bishops in Germany and the Low Countries have been pushing, things like communion in the hand and all of this sort of stuff. He could see that coming and see what the consequence was going to be. The man wasn't a prophet, you know, just the same as, you know, Paul VI wasn't a prophet when he said, if you allow contraception, here's a list of all the things that will happen. It's just like, dude, this is just you know, the logical outreach and the logical conclusion of this. I agree with you on this, you know, subject of the whole question of you know, intentional discipleship. That it's one of the things that upsets me and just so much. It's like, you know, people come along and they're, I was raised Catholic, but it's like, you weren't raised Catholic. You were raised maybe in a pseudo-Catholic household. You were just kind of defaulted to Catholicism in that sense. You weren't raised Catholic. If you were raised Catholic, we wouldn't be having this specific conversation. You may no longer be in the church, but there would be a different and more intellectual conversation, let's say, about why you're no longer here. I am always saying to people, you know, that obviously I'm a convert, you're a convert, Christine, a convert, revert, you know, plenty of converts and reverts here. And we all have our moment. You have the moment when you say, okay, this is it. This is the commitment I am making. One of the things that I think is sometimes unfortunate for cradle Catholics is that they don't necessarily have that moment. I would urge all cradle Catholics to find that moment, even if you need to go and make it. You know, it is the Feast of the Sacred Heart this weekend. It's a great time to do that, to make that conscious, intentional discipleship commitment to say, you know what? Have I been doing this kind of default because I was raised this way, because I was brought up? Okay, I'm going to make that explicit commitment to say, you know what? I'm intentionally committing to being Catholic. I want to be part of this smaller church.
Yeah, the intentional discipleship, it just grates my gears. It sounds like something came out of Vigneron's planning session, right? Intentional disciple. It's spot on. It means exactly 100%. What it means. And the reverts and converts have intentional discipleship, no question about it. I just hate that phraseology.
I'm not crazy about it.
Well, come up with something better, but it works.
But just going back to this idea of a smaller church, I agree with Cardinal Ratzinger. I think the church does need to become smaller. If you look at the 2,000-year history of the church and the ups and the downs and the times of prosperity and the times of persecution, it tracks quite a bit, if you're familiar with Old Testament history, with the history of the Israelites. As you can see, in their times of prosperity, the Israelites would become very lax. They would stop really practicing their faith. They would intermarry with the pagans and things like that. And so God would allow this punishment to come upon them, this terrible punishment, this persecution, sometimes by outside secular forces. And then the Israelites would be reduced to just sort of this smaller group. And then they would come repenting in fasting in sackcloth and ashes, saying sorry to God, and then he would then again bless them. And so I think our church, unfortunately, is kind of going through that right now.
Yeah, and if you get to read Our Lady of Akita, Approved Apparition, talks about the divine reset. I don't know if that's actually a phrase, but I like to think of it as the divine reset, because we have the great reset that's being talked about. You know, the devil and his advocates out there are going to be talking about, you know, you'll own nothing and be happy, right? So the World Economic Forum and all those henchmen. So, but God has the final say, and that's the deal. When you have the divine reset, and that one day a rain will come, but it'll be a fire, because that's how the purification is supposed to happen. End of the world, not necessarily. It's supposed to be a reign of, era of triumph, the Immaculate Heart of Mary and all that. So we're not talking about the end of the world here or anything. And thank God we get another go at this, that there is a reset, that God does put us back on track, that, but there will be hell to pay in between, but sometimes it takes that comeuppance to get things back on track. And in a sense, if God really didn't care about us and just left us going along the way we are, really? Yeah, it's not going to be good. So the idea that there is hope, there will be a springtime, a new Pentecost, and all of that is what we look forward to. And what we're seeing here is probably the end of the decline, I would think. I really do. I think that that hockey stick effect in all the statistics and everything, you start looking at the lowest attendance and lowest belief and lowest everything, religious orders and all those markers that you want to put out there, all going down, and I think you're going to be seeing an uptick. And at the bottom there, that's when, things get turned around, and that's where God steps in. Don't think that it's always just punishment. It is, but there's a flip side, a correctional, medicinal. God heals as he wounds type of phrase in Scripture. And that's what we have to look at, that God is actually cleansing, purifying, chastening the church to have a new beginning, to have a new springtime of grace. And I really believe that's where we're going here. But all these things that we're talking about here are just the symptoms of prosperity that happened for so many decades, so many centuries, really, coming out of the whole Christendom era when everybody was Catholic. Well, that doesn't really get any intentional disciples after a while. So God has to actually say, okay, let some breeze flow through and the tree starts shaking and all the bad fruit rocking off, and that's kind of, and some pruning going on and all this type of stuff.
And just as he did with the Israelites, bringing in outside pagan forces coming in and sometimes taking them over and destroying their things. He's doing the same thing here. I think in America, the church was allowed to handle problems internally for so many decades, and they completely mishandled things, especially in the sex abuse, that it's a good thing. It's a good thing that various state attorneys general are now conducting these massive sex abuse probes and, publishing these reports showing hundreds, if not thousands, of priests abusing thousands of victims. It's a house cleaning. Yeah. Same thing with secular media. When the Boston Globe Spotlight uncovered all this abuse in the Boston Archdiocese back in 2002. Now, a lot of Catholics at the time were very upset about it. They attacked Boston Globe, said, you guys are just anti-Catholic. You guys hate the church. This is why you're doing this. Well, it may be that they hate the church. It may be that they're anti-Catholic. Sure, that doesn't mean that it wasn't a good thing that they did that. In fact, Pope Benedict thanked them for that, saying, thank you for exposing this. We need to clean up the church. And I would remind people out there who are angry at Church Militant for exposing the sex abuse in the trad world, because right now the trad world is facing its day of reckoning in the way that the Novus Ordo Church had to face it back in 2002. They're just facing it now, and people are attacking us. We're the evil media who's out to attack tradition. That's complete and total nonsense. I don't know how many times I've heard that. It's a complete canard and red herring, especially since I think every single person on this panel attends the traditional Latin Mass, and some of us have been doing so for 20 years, like myself. It's completely ridiculous. You should be thanking us because we're trying to purge this filth from the church that we love.
Yeah, in 2018, we weren't attacking anybody. We weren't exposing the problem just because we didn't like the Novus Ordo. We were exposing. No, we didn't. We exposed it because it needs exposing. And
we
really,
love the church.
It was all of this stuff coming to us, saying, "Well, you need to tell my story, my story, my story." And we're telling like 1 out of 10 stories, maybe at that time, but it certainly wasn't had anything to do with liturgy.
No, and I think you brought up the example of the Israelites, and of course the classic punishment that was bestowed on the Israelites was the invasion and the sacking of Jerusalem by the Babylonians in 587 BC. And so they were hauled off to Babylon. And of course, this is the long period of the Babylonian captivity. Now, there's been a lot made of this notion of like, well, the Second Vatican Council was, the start of our Babylonian captivity. I assure you it is not. I assure you that, the Babylonian captivity was not merely you have to say Mass in the vernacular. That was not the Babylonian captivity. But the Babylonian captivity ends with interesting kind of not liturgical, a scriptural note. It's actually like the last books of when the Jews assemble their scriptures together. The last book is the Chronicles book with Cyrus the Great of Persia saying, hey, go back to Jerusalem and rebuild the temple, which of course they do, and that is the temple that Jesus was aware of, and he would see there, and that was that. So there is this restoration that actually comes, and I think there's a very important thing there, that yes, the non-religious, the non-people of God, the pagans, the Babylonians, the United States government come and persecute you, drag you away, haul you off. Here's the captivity. It's difficult. But ultimately, out of that comes a recognition of what you are as, oh, you're the people of God. You should go back and rebuild your temple. And that we're just going to have to endure the captivity.
Yeah, as our Lord said, that the greatest punishment, St. John Hughes actually said it, that the greatest punishment would be given by giving you religious leaders who were bad. Thanks for joining us for today's episode of The Download. Now please join us as we finish in prayer, begging Our Lady's intercession for our nation and our church. In the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
Salve Regina.
Mater misericordiae, vita dulcedo et spes nostra salve. A te clamamus exules filii Eve. A te suspiramus gementes et flentes, in hac lacrimarum vale. Ea ergo advocata nostra, illos tuos misericordias oculos ad nos converte, et Iesum benedictum fructum ventris tui, nobis post hoc exilium ostende. O clemens, o pia, o dulcis Virgo Maria. Amen.
Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit.
Amen.
Thank you again for joining us for The Download. We premiere a new episode like this every weekday, 5 p.m. Eastern Time. From all of us here at Church Militant, God bless you.